your blessings so that my mind may be one with the Dharma. Grant your blessings so that Dharma may progress along the path. Grant your blessings so that the path may clarify confusion. Grant your blessings so that confusion may dawn as wisdom. Hello. So in this talk, the challenge is to share something about Vajrayana or Dorji Tekpa. We talked about Hinayana or Theravada, in Tibetan Tek Chung, the smaller, lesser vehicle. Then about Mahayana, the greater vehicle, Tek Chen. And then from the Tibetan, Bhutanese, Vajrayana or Tantric perspective, there's a third yana, which is Vajrayana. In terms of view, it is like the Mahayana, it is to liberate everybody. But in terms of practices, in terms of energy, in terms of the sense of what practice in the Vajrayana looks like, feels like, it's slightly different. So there comes all this richness. You see behind me a tanka that I'll speak a little bit about, but there's a lot of energy, there's flames. Sometimes it's very peaceful, but in any case, you already, just from the makeup of shrine rooms and so forth, you get a first sense that it works with your sense perceptions and your imaginary powers. So in the Theravada, we have so much emphasis on let's not try to believe in something, let's not create something which isn't there. Let's just work with reality. But in this case, we again work with reality, but we highlight within that reality certain energies which exist. It's like a piece of music doesn't deny that silence exists, but it highlights one possibility of energy and invites you to enjoy that. So that is what I understand of Vajrayana, that we work with energy, with how things feel. So we don't just analyze them like, do they really exist? And then we would find out that they don't, which we do in the Mahayana tradition. There's lots of analyzing. But in spite of discovering that ultimately things don't have an inherent existence, there's still a lot of display. There's appearances, and they are vivid and sometimes beautiful and sometimes excruciating. And in the Vajrayana, we are just curious about them. How things feel, how they develop. And in many ways, it's again close to Theravada or Hinayana, which is also very tactile, very direct, very not questioning too deeply. Theravada questions, do I exist? And the answer is no, there's no inherent me. But it doesn't question experience so much. And in the Mahayana we do that and we find out again there's no solidity there. But in the Vajrayana we are less concerned with that. We are just enjoying that the display of energy is there. And there's many warnings about Vajrayana that it can be misunderstood. Let me share the story of Rudra, which is a traditional story. It is about two students who went to their teacher and who asked, how should we practice? And the teacher said, accept everything. Something along those lines, accept everything. And the two students took this instruction very differently. One took it to mean, do whatever discursive thoughts come up in your mind. He had lots of sex and gambled a lot, which was those days considered as a bad thing to do. But he thought the instruction, accept everything, meant don't have any reservations to follow your first inclination. The other student found the instructions very difficult to follow because he thought it meant not to reject anything as it arises in your mind. So passion might arise and you might find your own mind doing all sorts of things which you didn't expect and didn't hope, and which shock you and which humble you, because you might be trained to a certain level, but you might find out that your mind is much more wild and much more playful, much more unpredictable, much less constant than you would expect it and want it and feel it should be. So he found it very difficult, but because he discovered all sorts of things about himself which he didn't expect and hope. Students met again after a year, went back to their teacher and asked, and realizing that they had taken the instruction very differently, they asked who has been right. And the teacher indicated the one who found it very difficult to start with, but who then really thoroughly familiarized with his own mind, so that confusion started to dawn as wisdom, that student had understood the instruction correctly, and that the other student, by the name of Rudra, had misunderstood the instruction. And Rudra had so gotten used to follow his first impulse, not his wisdom, but his first impulse, that at that point he raised his sword and killed his teacher, which is not a very good thing to do. So that solidified his view. So the story's morale is that Tantra is dangerous in the sense that the instructions are very simple, but if you misunderstand them, you could believe that it gives you permission to consolidate impulsive energies which are not helpful. While it really does say, don't be afraid of who you are really okay the way you are, really, truly. It has strongly that message, which is beautiful. It could have that misinterpretation, and therefore sometimes things are kept secret, or they are called self-secret in the sense that if you study them, but you have no sense of the energy, which means an introduction to the lineage and so forth, then you'll not get the real point. I tell that so as to link, for example, to the Tanka behind me, which is an interesting one. You see Dorje Trolle, which is a form of the Padmasambhava or Guru Rinpoche, which you may know, all immersed in flames. But if you look well, you see that he wears a black crown. And the black crown belongs to the lineage of the Karmapas. So in Tibetan Buddhism, that is just a historical fact. There are four main Buddhist lineages. The Nyingma tradition, which is very prominent in Bhutan. The Kagyu lineage, which is also very prominent in Bhutan. Then the Gelugpa, which is a little bit available in eastern Bhutan. It's also the tradition that the Dalai Lama belongs to, first and foremost. And then the Sakya, which is not so prominent in Bhutan. So, four main lineages, and it's just, sometimes their teachings are slightly different. For example, the Gelugpas really have fully celibacy, so all the teachers don't marry, while that is done in Nyingma and Kagyu. So there are some differences in the teachings themselves, but otherwise it's just student-teacher relationships and handing down in a living stream of teachings. And it's not so much, the main thing I feel is not whether they contradict, but it is just that there is like different families. There's a family, this family, and there's that family. And well, there's four major families. And two of them are combined in this Tanka and combined in the tradition available in Bhutan, and combined in the tradition that Kiem and myself, what is now called the Shambhala centers, in the Buddhist sense, they are first and foremost Nyingma and Kagyu. So that's combined in this Tanka, which is quite unique. Taksang, the cave in Bhutan, which you know well about, that is the first place where Guru Rinpoche manifested in this wrathful form. So this energetic form in which he doesn't argue with people in logical terms, but he overpowers, doesn't fight them in an aggressive sense of wanting to destroy their essence, but he tries to inspire and to bring out the rugged, true nature of people. So he was one of the first Buddhist masters to come to Tibet and Bhutan, and he felt the people have a sort of savage, real energy, and he wanted to connect to that, and he wanted to clear away intellectual or traditional inhabitations which would keep you away from understanding life as it is, which is another meaning of Dharma. So he manifested in this wrathful form. Yeah. You see some other pictures. Let me tell a little bit about other pictures you see. In particular, you see Trungpa Rinpoche in an army dress. Again, interesting one. You are slightly familiar with it. But so it's not, Tantra or Vajrayana is being not afraid of energy, to identify with them. In the Hinayana and the Theravada, we feel we have to calm down, we have to let go of all sorts of illusions. In the Vajrayana that is true, but we also feel we can identify, we can more positively, rather than let confusion try to get rid of it, let it sink down, we say, okay, we can identify with positive enlightened energies. So the manifestation behind me is a manifestation of energy. Also Trungpa's invitation to work with what dressing up as an army person, what that brings up in us. His idea, you might have seen it in the Crazy Wisdom movie, that made a lot of sense to me. Somebody talks about that Trungpa Rinpoche was pushing many of his students to wear army dresses and be a kasung, as he called it, a protector. And people had a hard time with it. And his point was that as long as we are afraid of identifying with the pure energy within that, if you put on a uniform, you do feel, and especially if you walk in formation, you do feel it rouses a certain energy. It could be that you don't feel it, but that would be a pity. Normally you identify with it, and many of us, especially the Buddhists, become sort of shocked that, ooh, we thought it was all about peace. And it is about peace, but it is also very much about not being afraid of who you are and not being afraid of rousing energy. So he wanted to play with that, because of course we put on our uniforms and sometimes we feel so delighted about it that we become rigid and judgmental and all the sort of things that we don't want to emphasize. But my understanding is Trungpa Rinpoche did not get out of the way of that. He didn't want to play it safely so as to make sure that we would only... the whole experience is supposed to make sure that we become egoless, enlightened beings rather than solidified egos with which, like Rudra. Of course, the whole experience should be like that. But the individual experience, he was not afraid to give us experiences in which both the possibilities of enlightenment and Rudrahood, the opposite of enlightenment, samsara, they're both born from the same origin, which that origin of energy isn't even enlightened or unenlightened. It's just what is there, and he wanted us to go there, and he dared to go there himself. Well, one of the statements he made is, I am who I am, and I encourage you to be who you are. So uncontrived, natural, and not afraid to identify with powerful, powerful in the sense of wrathful. We say the energy is there, wrathfulness without hatred, so it doesn't solidify with a core to resist against, but the energy comes up, the wisdom is allowed to be there, as well as the other aspects, the gentleness, the curiosity, the fear, the inhibitions, the shame, the embarrassment. All these emotions also truly happen in us. And he cried when a certain Zen master died, so he didn't hold back. I'm not very good at holding back my tears. He didn't hold back. Why would he? Why? And I think he did it because it happened naturally, but at the same time it worked out, I think, as a teaching in the sense of nobody has to hold back your true nature. Sometimes in your workplace, in certain cases, you can make a choice what you manifest and what you hold back more. You are an open book, not in the sense that you have no borders and you cannot make choices. But you very often make the choice not to hide anything, because why would you? And sometimes you do make that choice. Trungpa Rinpoche came to the West with that desire to share the essence of what he had been taught, and which what he had experienced and realized and stabilized through Buddhist practice. But it doesn't, the practices are all just steps to get to a certain way of being. And of course, then even if you have glimpses of enlightenment, it is about stabilizing it and getting it and letting it go again, not holding on to it, trying to grasp it. It won't work. It's like a piece of soap. If you grasp it more tightly, it's more likely to escape you. But if you allow this unenlightened experience and more enlightened experience to manifest itself, then likelihood becomes that confusion manifests as wisdom. And his passion was coming to the West to transmit that heart of the Buddhist teachings that he had received. He was very wary to sit on a throne and be a cultural hype, that people would look up to him and feel that it's very exotic. He wasn't interested in that. So that's why he experimented with so many forms. He experimented with language, with pronouncing differently. It is all about perceiving with a very fresh mind directly, so that you don't overlay reality with thinking that you already know it, so that you have fresh, new perspective. That is what Tantra is about, and that is what Trungpa Rinpoche was very much about. And he had a very hard time in the beginning when he didn't know how to communicate that, and before he started experimenting. He had a hard time because he felt people come with the wrong preconceptions, and it solidifies that it is something exotic rather than something fresh and direct. And although it is transmitted through a culture, it is a non-cultural. It's not a Western or an Eastern thing. It's a primordial, innate thing which every culture sometimes connects to anyway. Sometimes in spite of themselves. Sometimes we have rigid ideas of how men and women should like themselves and each other, and it doesn't work. And in spite of that, we feel suddenly a certain joy and a directness. Sometimes it is, of course, culture which helps. Sometimes a dance or a piece of music helps us to be overtaken by joy and moved, and in that we become very genuine and direct. And then below that you see the picture of his son, and on the other side you see him again, Sakyong Mipam, who's now leading our community and who emphasizes the Shambhala teachings, which I will give a short talk about separately. So in Vajrayana we work with energy, we identify with energy, we play with it, you could say. I wanted to share a little bit about the lineage. That it's about love and emotions. So often we say compassion is the love that we experience to somebody who we see as less powerful, at least at that instant. We feel compassion for somebody who we feel needs our help, and we are somehow temporarily above them. Not in terms of value, but in terms of maybe a child who needs help. So then we feel compassion. We feel love for people that touch our hearts, and we feel equal to them. And we feel devotion for people we believe, rightly or wrongly, that they are more developed than us, at least in a certain respect. So in Vajrayana we are not afraid to work with these energies, so rightly or wrongly, and I hope it's largely rightly, else you could be following the wrong teacher, rightly or wrongly, you believe, you protect, and you feel a sense of devotion, and you don't try to artificially make it up. Well, you try a little bit, but you don't try to fool yourself into thinking and feeling something that you don't feel. You try to be open to certain energies. So you try to use devotion. Some people are, especially Dutch people, are very down to earth. They sort of resist things like devotion and appreciating somebody. And we all take somebody who is very enthusiastic, we take them down and act normal, and sometimes we might try to embarrass them, and by acting cool, we are sort of not as elated as they are. But devotion is not over emotional and pretending that there are bursts of energy which are not really truly happening, but it does say, wow, it touches me, wow, I'm overtaken, if that's what happens. So that's also why we play with these forms of we talk about a kingdom, we appreciate our teachers, we don't just say hi, hi Rinpoche, nice to see you. We could do that, and they have no problem with it. Trungpa Rinpoche used to be called Rimp by some of his students back in England, and slowly he played with forms to help his students express respect, not, I believe, because his ego needed it, not because his students needed to be taught a lesson that they were bad, but to help them experience, to see how exceptional he was, and to appreciate that that possibility lives within them, because that's always linked. It's never, when you have devotion, the texts are very clear. Devotion means that you appreciate something that somebody has achieved, a purity that is really not what you have realized. But the fact that you appreciate it already shows that it is your true nature as well. So in terms of true nature, the teachings do not say teachers are better than students. In terms of realization, how much deeply people live in the area of open mind, how much we have sometimes a flicker of open mind. Sometimes I'm not prejudiced when I listen to the two of you, yeah, as my kids. But mostly it's just my own projections are all in the way, and I see only tiny little bits of all that manifests in front of me. Well, what I believe is that teachers, the more and more enlightened they are, they live in that area where all these preconceived notions, which make the world predictable, but which also mean it is a dull experience, they are taken away. Therefore, even when they see somebody who is very much in trouble, they see the energy pattern and the true nature, and that's what connects them truly to us, because their compassion and connection is not contrived. Because their perception is so pure, they see the possibilities and true nature, which is beautiful for everybody, basic goodness. They feel the connection, and when we start to sense that they live in that world, which we only every now and then have a small glimpse of, we feel overwhelmed, we feel intimidated and inspired at the same time. So those are feelings that arise. I talked about Trungpa Rinpoche, I mentioned the Sakyong. I love to always mention the regent, which was the first Western student who Trungpa Rinpoche fully empowered as being his regent, his successor in teaching the Buddha Dharma. The regent died very young. There's a whole story. The regent definitely displayed both enlightenment and confusion. That's also the way he looks back at it, and his part of the community that followed him has separated from the Shambhala community, so there's a split of your parents, but also a split in lineages in the Buddhist world. These things do happen. But even the people in his lineage, as far as I know them, I met with some of them, they do not say the regent was perfect, but they say the regent was very wholehearted, very dedicated. And he made major mistakes, and sometimes looked into them and without any apology said that mistakes were mistakes. Sometimes it isn't all that obvious what is a mistake and what is not. That brings me to, you see also a picture of a teacher who has just passed away. That's why I put his picture on the altar. That's Shambhala Rinpoche. That's the whole system of incarnation belongs to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and to Vajrayana. That was never practiced before, that people were sought or self-recognized themselves as being the reincarnation of somebody. That's a Tibetan system. It started with the Karmapa. He was the first, the second Karmapa was the first one to announce, I'm the rebirth of. And since then, well, we have now the 17th Karmapa, so you can imagine that has gone on for a couple of generations, since 1200 something. So Shamarpa was the second biggest teachers within the Kagyu tradition. Like I talked about as regent, Özal Tenzin